Good, Rob. Well, look, great to have you here. Excited to hear about what Encoded is. Always excited to hear about what Encoded is up to. Good to have you here. I know you were busy during our last session a few months ago, so a few months on, it'll be great to get the experience that you've got.
Good stuff. Thanks very much. I'm going to try and share the presentation locally, but just before I do that, I appreciate that some of the people on the call may not know me or Encoded. There's a couple there that I see familiar faces, so it's nice to see some of you there. I'm going to be talking today in the capacity of Gateway. So a few of the members here might be familiar with Encoded as an application provider, certainly from the DTM atonement collection processing side of things, IVR. We've got our own infrastructure in terms of telephony and so on and so forth, and ecom. But for the last 6 or 7 years, we've been building out a gateway. So for the purposes of this conversation, I'm going to be talking in the capacity of a gateway. So let me just share. Let me know if you can see this.
Yep.
Okay, lovely stuff. So just a couple of things that have been said already actually chime very much with us and what we've been doing for the last 25 years. And certainly MOTO has played a very big part in our lives and indeed the success of the industry as a whole. And it's been largely driven as a result of compliance and PCI. And what I'd like to do this afternoon is maybe look at this from a question mark. So where have we come from? Where have we going to? In a very similar way to what John did, but focusing very much in on what has happened to the industry and where do we all see things going in the future. So looking at that, if we go back to 2020, a few things were happening round about the turn of the century, and we had chip and pin. So something that we now take for absolute granted, popping your card into that POS terminal, tapping in your pin. Gone, certainly in the UK, are the signing your life away with regards to making a transaction. We also started to see PCI gather a little bit more momentum. There were famously some fines that were levied in America for Target and Sony. There was a big breach with Sony, and suddenly PCI had centre stage, and the fear of fines drove forward this particular standard. And we are starting to see from the 20s all the way through for the next 25 years, this cleaning up of card data, securing encryption and processing of card information. We then start to see Apple Pay. So something, again, we know and love almost every single day. The alternative payment methods that started back in 2014, we now start to see things like Samsung Pay and Google Pay, and soon to be Click to Pay. Also contactless. Famously launched just in time for the London 2012 Olympics, where you could buy a programme and a burger and a fries for £30, and then it went up to £50 and then £100. And if you can dare to believe it, there's now talk of lifting the limit altogether. So we should be able to see us tap and disappear as long as the card issuer is happy to accept that process. And behind all of this, EMV code, if you like, the standard, the people that write the standards, been beavering away at some more stuff that's going to affect us. And in 2019, they launched the Secure Remote Commerce standard, which then gave birth really to network tokens. And what we're going to be talking about in a few moments is the Click to Pay alternative payment method that is going to take advantage of those network tokens. And so now, where do we see this moving forward? We're starting to see things like account to account or talks to account based on some recent success stories. We've got flexible credentials where you can spread payments, and we're going to be seeing some more AP2. So some of you talked about AI and how bots will be able to make purchases on your behalf, and what that future looks like, and what are the protocols and the standards that are being written at this moment in time that we are going to leverage on. Now, up to this point, card information has been absolutely crucial in order to make a transaction, whether it be online, whether it be in the contact center. Having those 16 digits and being able to read them out was, in effect, your gateway to commerce. And as we've just touched on, and John mentioned it, a mandate has been published by MasterCard. It should be highlighted that Visa have yet to issue their own. But MasterCard have the first out the traps and have said that by 2027, issuers have the choice, and by 2030, they would like to see no card numbers in circulation at all. Now, what I'm going to come on to in a minute is why they have made that decision, how that's going to affect the industry, and how the products and services that we all rely on is going to have to adapt to this changing market. So the simple problem is fraud. So one of the things that we start to see is that fraud is reaching a crippling level. Now, from an e-commerce perspective, we could be looking at 91 billion by 28. So 2028, the forecast is currently 91 billion for online payment fraud alone. And if we have a look at global cybercrime, then we're looking at over 10 trillion. Now, that is an impossible number to try and quantify. In fact, I think it's probably impossible to visualize it. People have had a stab in the dark at doing it, and the one that I quite like to look at is that if cybercrime was compared in terms of GDP, where would it sit on the global stage? And what we can see here is it would be the third biggest economy in the world. So behind America and China, we now have cybercrime. So when we talk about removing of card information and we talk about two-factor authentication and network tokens, this is a step in the right direction to try and do our bit in terms of addressing this cybercrime. Now, cybercrime covers all sorts of things. It's ransomware, it's bank-to-bank fraud, and all the rest of it. But card payments do play an important part in that. So by removing card numbers, has anyone actually stopped to think about MOTO? Because what I start to think is that when you start to think in terms of fraud, how big a problem is MOTO? Because in truth, it's a teeny tiny slice of the overall pie. Now, to try and hone in on what that might look like, cardholder present is by far the biggest slice of the payments market. Cardholder not present, loosely speaking, is about 40% of all transactions. These are UK transactions. And within that cardholder not present, about 10% of that is MOTO. So if you look at it as a total sum, you include cardholder present, you're looking at about 4% of all transactions are actually MOTO. Now, I happen to think that when the decisions were being made and the think tanks were put together and trying to address the problem of fraud, I doubt anyone really even thought about MOTO and what the impact of having card data removed from your card might have on vulnerable demographics that rely on contact centers. The use of smartphones in rural areas where cell reception isn't particularly good, or whether you've got merchants with legacy systems. And I've put in there also emergency situations. So if you lose your phone or for whatever reason the battery's dead, how on earth do you get yourself out of trouble? So these kind of fringe case studies all start to now make a bit more sense when you start to imagine a life without a PAN number stamped across the middle of that card. And for any of you that are looking at that image there, I recently got myself an AI media subscription. So if you can spot the AI imagery that just litters this presentation, then be sure to enjoy it. So moving on ever so slightly, what's it going to look like if we have an evolving landscape? Because it doesn't matter really whether you're a fish in the ocean or whether you're a card payment processing company. If the environment changes and you do not evolve to meet the new environment, you are going to die. And what we are seeing is a major evolution within the payments landscape if a lot of this comes to pass. We are, and a couple of you have talked about pay by links and the rationale behind that and whether or not there's confidence in it. Now, what I would say is that within a contact center setting, if you are on the phone to somebody and you tell them you're going to send a link to their phone, then they are going to be accepting it. And it's not so much whether or not they trust what's coming through the handset, it's whether or not there is a benefit to them to accept it. And so if we try and separate what we're trying to determine as a second guess, we can now start to think to ourselves, right, we have the secure environment, we have the customer on the phone, we want them to pay in a method and a way that is convenient for them. And a few of the alternative payment methods like your Apple, your Google and Click to Pay, stored card information and all those kind of things are here and they are already live. Some of you might be aware of like merchant initiated transaction, customer initiated transaction, where you've got your traditionally stored card in a vault. As we start to move towards network tokens, we're going to start to hear more about 3RI or 3 requester initiated transactions. So this is effectively where the card issuers are allowed to challenge or can challenge a subscription at any point. And some of you may have Netflix. And what you're going to start to see is those random challenges coming through your phone. Are you sure you still want this? Are you happy that your card information is being used in this way? So from a consumer perspective, I can't see anything negative about the way in which the market is going, particularly if it is a more secure way in which we can work. Some of the things that we start to see, again, from a gateway perspective, so I'm just going to pull it back slightly from the application side of things, because we've talked a little bit about whether or not DTMF token collection and contact center virtual terminals, pay by links, that sort of thing. So if you allow me just for a minute to think of this from a gateway perspective, you may have heard of the term orchestration. And the reasons why this is going to be important within a contact center setting, I'll come on to in a minute. But for me, orchestration has become, if you like, the new fandangle, fair trade, locally sourced word of the industry, where you're starting to see acquirers throw the word around without really a lot of consideration as to what it is. What I like to see, particularly when you think of orchestration, is a frictionless and immediate way that you can securely get an authorization code from a card issuer once you have done all of your checks and balances. And it doesn't mean to say that you go down just one route. One of the things that we're starting to see sat in the middle of between the acquirers and the card holders is that not all acquirers are equal. So when you've collected that card information by whatever means, whether it's in a contact center or it's on a pay by link form, you are then able to send that down to the issuer and hope and pray that they give you an authorization code. If, however, you are a merchant that has begged, stealed, and borrowed in order to get a merchant account because you may work on the fringes of the market or some of the more nefarious merchant category codes that we see, you might see an artificial uplift of decline codes, not because the person that you've got on the phone is a dark actor, but it's because the issuer is not comfortable with the acquirer that they have been used. By enabling multiple merchant accounts for a single merchant, that's to say that they've gone to various providers, you can then start to orchestrate how you send that transaction down. Now, bringing this back to the contact center, one of the things that we're starting to see is that instead of giving a decline code back to the agent, which is then given back to the caller, we are now starting to see additional verification required. So this is effectively being able to have multiple bites of that particular cherry. So in that scenario, what we are then able to do and address in real time is to then send that transaction down to another acquirer or adapt the way in which we are facilitating that payment. It could be that you need to do an additional verification using an OAuth server, or it might be that we are looking to flip that transaction into an econ to take advantage of liability shift. There's lots of ways and means that you can start to use the APIs and the technology that is available to you in ultimately to get the best outcome for the card holder that is sat on the phone at that moment in time. Now, this is quite an interesting way of thinking about things. So, Paul, if I might, if there's any questions at this slide, then it might be interesting to hear them now. More than happy to move on if the juice is being poured out in people's eyes. This is obviously an electrifying subject for me, but can't guarantee that everyone feels the same.
No, let's just open that up there, just to see if we've got any specific questions that folks want to raise. There's a fair bit of discussion going on in the chat, allied stuff. The key question, I completely agree with you in terms of the whole orchestration question. We were looking at it from about 2018, 2019. It's all gone a bit flat because some of the real energetic startups, Gravy and one or two of the others, have really kind of made a lot of progress. And then it kind of sort of, I think a lot of the buzz in orchestration, it hasn't completely disappeared, but I think it's been tarnished by the fact that, I think, as you're alluding to, some gateway companies that were very much pure, very focused gateways. Their marketing departments got hold of the term orchestration and really went to town on it, and that's probably left some in the industry thinking, well, do we wait till this whole orchestration thing beds down, gets a little bit more mature? We don't want to get our fingers burnt, but I think there's huge amounts of opportunity here. But we need to make sure that the organizations involved in this really understand the complexity of what's going in across multiple payment types, across multiple channels, in very different sectors in terms of what the transaction flows look like, where the risk is attached, the level
Absolutely.
of cross-border payment. And so this is a pretty interesting area to me, and it's certainly an area where we're actually going to be picking up on a little bit more detail on in our Future of Merchant Payments conference, which is being hosted by BT, physical event on the 25th of November. But any other thoughts from you, Rob, on this topic of orchestration?
So,
And while you're just maybe saying a few more words, if anybody's got any specific questions on this, I'll raise them.
absolutely. I see that Graham's got his hand.
Yeah.
Just before you, one of the things actually that Paul just mentioned is that orchestration, you're absolutely right, has kind of like gone a bit wild, but and again, I want this to be informative. I don't want this to be, this is all about Encoded. I genuinely want this to be informative and information thing. But one of the things that I find that merchants trip up on is they go off and they get their merchant account, they get their merchant category code for the majority of stuff that they do. And one of the things that orchestration can do wonderfully is give you or offer you the ability to have a merchant account that is better addressed to the product that is being paid for at that moment in time. Because there's quite often that some products will fall outside of the merchant category code from which you are processing the transaction. And we find that the issuers don't like that. And we get decline codes against it. And I can give you a quick example of insurance and repair of white goods, where you've got insurance for insuring if that white good goes wrong. But when you actually then come to make a claim, because it's invariably something that's broken that the insurance doesn't cover, you're then finding yourself making a purchase on white goods repair, which of course is a completely different risk profile from insurance. And we start to see up to a 10% decline on legitimate transactions. So it's a good example of where orchestration can help you. Graham, sorry, over to you.
Yeah, I was going to make some comments to that. I've always felt that the fraud levels at the MasterCard and Visa level have never been sufficient enough to get them to do their job properly and police PCI, so the whole concept around merchants being the policeman of PCI has always failed, because the rules say that merchants can only move between acquirers if they're PCI compliant. Nobody enforces that. So every time a acquirer tries to enforce a merchant to behave, they just say, well, I'll go to your competition, and therefore they're allowed to continue their walk of life without being PCI compliant. And if you look at these fraud rates, they're so low for the schemes. They just, I think it's only governments that care, because it's going into the wrong pockets. So my view, and there were some very interesting stats coming out of MasterCard. I'll try and find them and give them to Paul so he can share afterwards. But it was showing that basically with 2FA coming on payments now, the fraud levels have been decreasing substantially. So I'll try and find that. So I've always wanted it to be sufficient enough to get the industry to police its own standards, but I don't know about anybody else, but I've never experienced that.
Anybody else wants to come in on that, please do. But yeah, I think things are certainly changing. Strong customer authentication, two-factor authentication, wider use of 3D Secure, and as Rob mentioned, secure remote commerce. It's all coming together. But again, a lot of this really does come down to the industry's capacity to move, and particularly the merchant sector capacity to be able to move at the pace of the industry mandates. Because certainly when it comes to things like panless cards, we're still in an environment where a pan key entry in many different channels, whether that's on your phone or on a standard checkout browser, yeah, or in a IVR type situation, the consumer still needs to know what that pan is. And so being able to put these quite fundamental changes in place, when if anybody's putting systems in today, they are not going to be taking them out between now and 2030. And so it's aligning the anti-fraud mandate change requirements to what is actually the capacity to make these things happen in real life. So it's a fascinating area. I'm not seeing any, let me just check whether there's been any other questions popped in while I was
just looking at one of the things that we were observing, and again, you might remember me saying that so far we haven't heard from the other schemes as to whether or not they're going to follow suit. In the same way that at the moment, anyone who has a card issued can request accessibility features for that card.
Yeah.
So you've got things like Braille, and you've got things like chips coming out, clips, so you know which way around the card is. I can see a time where if you are partially sighted or blind, or you just want your card number, you can request that on your card. And all the time you have card numbers in circulation, you will need services and solutions to collect and process that card information.
Yeah.
But I think that if we were to wind the clock forward and go forward to 2030, what's the statistical likelihood that we will all be carrying cards in our pockets with no card numbers on it? I think it's slim, but it does open up dialogue as to the direction of travel and the reason behind these decisions. If everyone's happy, I'm going to move on.
Yeah, please do.
So what is happening? So if we now look from 2025 to 2030, what can we expect? Well, account to account, personally, I think this is one of the more exciting things that are coming down the line. Now, probably I should declare an interest. Encoded are very close with Visa. They are our chosen provider. So forgive me if I talk a little bit more about Visa than I do MasterCard. I'm sure the guys at MasterCard are swell. However, from a Visa perspective, we're looking at A2A. So this is account to account payments, a bit like open banking, but with two crucial pieces of difference. The first is being able to dispute a transaction. The second is a chargeback mechanism. So it's still bank-to-bank transfers. It's like open banking, but you've got the security of everything that Visa brings to the market. Flexible credentials. This is a bit like a buy now, pay later. So you can go onto your card, you can decide how much you want to pay, and you can decide to pay it over a certain period of time. Now, some of the more skeptical amongst us may very well be looking at some of these things, the click to pay, the A2A, the flex, and see similarities with other people that are in the market. Now, you need to check me on this, but I think it was 2016, the deal with American Visa Inc., completed with Visa Europe. I think it was 23 billion euros with which Visa bought Visa Europe. And one could argue that they now need to start recouping that money. So whether or not they're looking at Apple and the size of the market that they have and go, right, click to pay, that's a lovely chunk out of Apple. We've now got flexible credentials, that's a nice chunk out of the likes of Klarna, and various other things. You can start to see that some of the schemes are going after these more lucrative payment methods. However, for the time being, we're just going to veneer fraud prevention over the top of that so that it's more palatable. Just recently, Keir Starmer announced that the government are going to try once again to get a digital identity across the line. They have said that it's going to be, or they want it live by the end of the Parliament, which takes it to August 2029. We'll see whether or not that actually happens, but it's another step in the digital direction. And then, of course, some of you may be aware that Google recently announced the APP or AP2, which is the protocol with which automation can process transactions on your behalf. So all of the bots, the AI assistants, all that sort of stuff will be using the agent payments portal that Google are spearheading. So where does this leave PCI? Because for me, when you start looking at PCI, you are all about descoping a card payment environment or card data environment. If there is going to be no card data, therefore there will be no card data environment. If there is no card data environment, then what's the use of PCI? Now, this is a question that I think we need to ponder because it is one with which a lot of the applications, the services, hell, the patents that are being banded around really hang their hat. And in a future where there is no need for PCI, then where does the compliance go? Those are my final thoughts. Grateful for your time. Any questions?